All right, team. We saved the best for last. I'd like to introduce Board of Parole Chair Renee Schulte to share information with us about the Iowa Board of Parole.
Well, hello, everybody. I do not know if I have control of the slides or not.
I think I do, Renee.
Perfect. I'll let you. So you can go ahead and move them forward.
Okay. Jennifer, can you see the slides okay? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So I'll introduce myself as we get kicked off. So I'm Renee Schulte. I've been the chair of the Board of Parole now for the past year and a half. I was an alternate member prior to that for about 2 years. And so former previous life, I was a elected official. I was a state house member a few years back. And so I call myself a recovering politician because I've tried to stay the heck out of all of that. But here we are in parole. And the reason I'm here on this particular board, and we'll talk about how the board is made up, but my background's in mental health. And so I was in the state house and helped one of the beginnings of the big redesign of the mental health system, moving it from the 99 county system to districts, and it's now been, or to regions, that's now been moved to districts. And so I spent a lot of time working on behavioral health, working on trying to get substance use and mental health for all Iowans. And I finally got my hands on the folks that are incarcerated to help from that side of the spectrum and trying to get them to get the services they need as they reenter the community so that we have less recidivism back into parole. So today we're going to start talking about parole and specifically what it is, how it works, those kinds of things. Anytime you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will cover those as we go. Katrina's going to help me kind of monitor that and let me know if you have questions. But we always start out with the mission of the Board of Parole. When we're working with corrections, whether it's at an institution or at a district, we hear a lot, how come the board just doesn't do what we want them to do? Well, the board's not designed to be corrections. We're actually an independent body. We have an independent budget. We're independently created with the idea of that we work with public safety, just like corrections, but come at it from a different perspective. And so we'll go ahead to the next slide and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So you can see a lot of the things that we do here. We do a lot of parole decisions. We do work release decisions. We move people on for special sentences. We deny people when things don't sound correct. We grant interviews. We do a whole lot of work. And what you'll see in the very last column is that we dropped in the total number of decisions made. This was due to a change in our processing center, what we call ICON, the Iowa Correctional Offenders Network. We made a change. When people come back in on revocations, everybody in Iowa law is allowed to have a minimum of 1 review annually, unless they have a mandatory minimum or a life sentence. And folks coming in were just getting run up a lot faster for revocations, and it was different numbers of months for different levels of revocations, and it was creating this churn. And they were almost all denials. So we can look at our denial numbers and they were exactly the same. So it's dropped off now that it's cleaned up. So now we're getting the better quality types of decisions to make. You can go ahead to the next slide. So I also added this for you. So in addition to what we do on the parole side, we also do executive clemency. So the governor has asked us as a board to do all the background research on firearm restorations, on pardons, and on commutations. The difference between pardons and commutations are folks that are still incarcerated who may have that mandatory minimum sentence or a life sentence that we're asking for an opportunity for parole or to move up their date. The folks that want a pardon are folks that are 5 to 10 years past or longer, past their time. They've completed all of their time and they are looking to remove that from their record. So what the board does is the board does all of the research for the candidates that come in. And these numbers are actually pretty low. Once you start moving into FY25, they got slow for a while and we've caught up. So now we're in the last year to 2 years everybody's caught up, and which is wonderful. So it's been a lot more work, but we've got everybody kind of through the pipeline. So what we do is make the recommendation. Now the governor is the only person who can make a decision for a commutation, for firearms rights restoration, or for a pardon. So all we do is make a recommendation and then the governor decides what she's going to do next. You can move that forward. All right, so here what we're going to talk about today, and this is where I'm going to talk about how the DOC and the board's different. We're going to talk about what these reviews look like because a lot of people don't know what we do. We're going to talk about time calculation because a lot of folks are confused when somebody gets a so many year sentence. That does not equal how much time's in prison. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how parole decisions are made, talk a little bit about release plans and our upcoming projects and the work we're doing with corrections. Go ahead. All right, so this is where I said the board is different than corrections. We are appointed by the governor specifically and confirmed by the Iowa Senate. And if you have a full board member, they do a full 4-year term, and then they would either be reappointed or they could stop at any time. We've had quite a bit of turnover in the last year with the board. And so we have pretty much new members across the board, except for our vice chair. She came on after I was an alternate as the vice chair, and it's probably been our longest serving full-time member. But the board is made up of an attorney, of a person with mental health background, and members of minority groups. And so it's important to remember that we are made up of a diverse group on purpose to make decisions from various backgrounds. The other thing that's important to know is that we have to still be politically balanced. So we have to be balanced with the number of Democrats and Republicans on our group. We used to have to be party balance or gender balanced for the number of people, male and female, but that went away last July. But right now we do have 3 males and 2 females, which is as balanced as it can get with an odd number board. But to do any decisions on our board, it takes a minimum of 3 people to make that decision. And if whoever the decider is, the most, I forget how they word it, but the most stringent vote wins. So if 2 people vote for somebody to get out, but 1 person votes to stay in, they stay in. And that's the way this works. So it's not like a majority rules kind of situation. The situation with commutations is a recommendation. So however many are for, however many are against, all those recommendations go to the governor, and then she makes a decision based on that. But in addition to the team that's the Board of Parole, we also have liaisons for the board whose job it is to work with the institutions for us. We have a victim liaison who makes sure that all victims are notified for hearings and are allowed to speak at those hearings. And then we also have a revocation liaison because we have 2 judges, administrative law judges, who revoke people back to prison. So we are a full service office. We have people going in, people going out. And so it's a lot of natural tension in there. So we have conversations about what that should be and how that should work. Corrections has to give us what in the code, it says that they provide administrative support. So they do things for us like HR, finance, things like that. But we do have separate budgets and we report directly to the governor. You can go ahead and move forward. So there's a difference between interviews and case plan reviews. So remember when I said everybody without that minimum sentence or that life sentence we see annually. Everyone who has a registered Board of Parole victim, we have to interview, have a conversation face to face. So if that registered victim is registered, if they want to be part of that, we have to have a hearing. Everyone else without the registered victim, we can do on paper. And we call those case plan reviews. And we do combinations of both. So today we did 6 interviews this morning. We just finished up 2 interviews this afternoon, and then we went into paper reviews after that. And so everybody gets reviewed, but it depends upon if they need to have a registered victim or not. Now the board has the authority to pull on anybody they want to interview. And so sometimes when we're kind of on the fence, maybe a little wobbly about what it says on paper versus what we're hearing about the person, we still may want to bring them in and do interviews. As you can guess, interviews take quite a bit more time. They have to prep for them. We do a lot of research. You would not believe the amount of information we have on a person before we make a decision. And we have a lot of time and a lot of effort that goes into making those. And so the interviews are much more time consuming. So we limit how many of those we can do in a week because we do a lot of case plans. As you saw in that previous slide, we're anywhere between 10,000 and 12,000 decisions in a year. So we got a lot to do. We can't just mess around with, like small things. We got to keep moving. So there's a lot going on there. So in addition to the annuals, meaning that they come up annually, staff can initiate people anytime that they want to. If they think that somebody has finished a treatment program or they've done something that's worthy of a closer look, or they have, changed their behavior in some way, we can review them earlier. So staff initiated, especially right now, is the majority of our list. Everybody gets that annual review, but you can staff initiate further, and that brings up our numbers of how much we do each week. You can go ahead and move that forward. All right, so here's the thing that nobody knows and everybody needs to know. Time calculation. This is about Iowa law. This is not the Board of Parole. This is not my opinion. This is not anything I can change. Judges can't change it either unless they change the law. But everybody that comes in Iowa has earned time, and they have loss of earned time that can affect how long their sentence is. Now, sometimes it depends. Some folks have to serve all their time up front, and the earned time is just added at the end and shortens their parole. Other people get all of their earned time up front. And so, like this means, if somebody comes in on a 10-year sentence, they basically have that cut in half the minute they walk in the front door. It's 5 years or less. So by the time we have to process them, maybe move them into a residential work release program or move them on to parole so they can have some community supervision, they're not serving the full 5. They're going to be down further so that they can get into a residential program, on-street parole, those kinds of things. So there's differences depending on the levels of crime. There's differences depending upon what they've done. So there's also the other big important piece people should know is if you have a 10-year special sentence for sex offenders, that also gets earned time. That's not 10 years either. And so sometimes people don't understand those things. Now, you can lose that good time. You can refuse to do treatment and lose some of that time. You can refuse to do program. You can escape and lose days, and that's called dead time. And so sometimes you will see a judge, somebody's brought back in, and I sign these every week. They're my dead time memos where I'm basically signing them saying this person gets this many more days added back on their sentence for whatever behaviors there were. You can go ahead and move it forward. So there's different ones and they're different. So when the thing to know is nobody ever gets the sentence that the newspaper says, ever. And that's very frustrating for all of us. The persons that really should know this are your county attorneys and your victim advocates. But we are learning that not all of them know that, or they forget or something. And so we're working on trying to help people understand this, because this gets really frustrating for victims who assume, well, I was told they had a 15-year sentence, but that might mean 5 or 6 by the time they move on. And it depends on what the crime was. It could be faster than that. And so we try to change. Now, there was a recent change on repeat habitual offenders. A habitual offender is somebody that's done just a whole lot of things and they roll it up into a habitual. You can have one for property or one for persons. Well, they've just changed that so that they have changes in their time calculations where they're actually not going to get as much good time, or they have to serve a certain percentage before the good time gets added in. So there are some recent changes to this, but the big message I want everybody to hear, although it sounds complicated, is that nobody really serves all the time that they say they're going to serve. And so when you have questions about that, the place to challenge this is at the beginning. When a judge sentences somebody, here's an example. If you start out with murder 1, and that's a life sentence, you plead that down to murder 2, then you've got a significant number of years, usually comes with a mandatory that they have to complete. But you go further than that, and you could have an attempted murder. You go further than that, you could get all the way down to willful injuries. And the lowest one on that is 5 years, where they're out in less than 2. And so it really does matter. Like when you plead down, that is the time in which you want to talk about sentencing, is when the case is set at the beginning. So if you're somebody listening today that wants to advocate for folks in that crime process, you need to think about this well before, because once they get a sentence, nobody can change it. Corrections can't change it. The board can't change it. We have to live by the date. And it's illegal to keep somebody in prison past their date. So when they have a date that says they're going away, going out the door to wherever they're going, we cannot keep them past that date unless somebody civilly commits them into, and that happens for some sex offense cases, but it's pretty rare. So you have to think about the board or corrections is not who to get mad at about this. It's much more upstream. You can go ahead and move ahead. Anybody has questions about that, feel free to put stuff in the chat and we'll do our best to answer questions. So here's how decisions are made. And there's a lot of information, as I said before. But corrections starts the process by saying we want to release or not release somebody. They know the folks better than we do. They see them every day. They work with them every day. So corrections says release or no release. A lot of the reasons for not releasing somebody is they haven't completed the treatment they need to complete. People are mandated for certain types of treatment. And so if they don't have that done, whether that is they're on a waiting list to get in, or maybe they've had some behavior challenges and got kicked out, lots of reasons. Well, those can't be recommended to release. Sometimes it's their behavior inside. They won't be recommended for release. And so DOC makes that decision first. The board almost always acknowledges and supports a no release recommendation. If correction says that guy should not leave, Who is the board to say, oh yeah, we should just let them out? That's a terrible idea. And so that almost never happens. So what we look at are all the ones that are now recommended for release. And this is all this information on the slide. We look at lots of different kinds of assessments. We look at their criminal history. We look at the victim statements or support statements. We could have people that are supporting them. Sometimes we have county attorneys who've written in and told us what their opinion is on the case, or there's lots of different types of just statements or information. It could be job letters. It could be just lots of things. But you'll see that minutes of testimony, you can have all kinds of information, but behavior inside is super important. We talk about what treatment they've done, how much time's been served, all of those kinds of things. So when you see an interview, the interview is one more piece. It's kind of the cherry on top of all of this information that's already being reviewed. It is not, we never make a decision just based on an interview. And I know on TV, and other places, they kind of like, well, they just bought whatever they said and that's why they let them out. There's way more to a situation than just an interview. And so by the time an interview comes, it may, one way or the other, but it's like the final piece, not the main part that makes the decision. You can go ahead. All right, so when we release somebody, we've got choices of where they go. Work release is part of community corrections. So if you don't know what work release is, that's community corrections. And so they have residential facilities that people go to where somebody can live for a period of time. A lot of these folks might be folks that maybe have some challenges with housing. There are some particular types of offenses that require a start at work release. So some of the more severe types of crime have to start there by law. And so there are people going into work release. People can also get to work release if they've revoked, but didn't revoke all the way back to prison. They can revoke back to this residential level. And so you'll see work release is a residential level, and people will stay there and generally a couple of months, 3 months, 4 months. And what you're seeing is people working, collecting some money for their own place, maybe establishing themselves in the community, whatever they need to be kind of successful to step down to parole. And so most folks go from work release, then step down to parole, but they have to have a place to go. So the folks that struggle with the place to go might get stuck in work release longer, but generally it's sort of that in between. So it's an additional level of treatment, more supervision, continuing on that. So it's a step down. That's how I like to say it. It's not in prison. It's a step down. They're still under supervision. They're still being, still having treatment, still getting correction that they need, but in a different location. Then we have parole, and parole can be lots of places, right? We'll do lots of things all over the place. If somebody has a place that's approved by the department and the districts, they approve where people go. The board does not, but we rely on corrections and those folks to tell us that this place has been approved. And we do that. Then what we call community providers is our coding is 10C, but those are places like your Kingdom Livings, your Honest Journey, your Dads with a Purpose, Tim's Club, lots of places. We sent somebody today, I'm not going to think of the name of it, but it was over in Sioux City, and it was one I hadn't heard of before. And they have 2 houses. I think probably one's female, one's male. And so it was a sober living facility over in Sioux City. And that's where one of our interviewees went today. And so these are our community providers, and we love community providers. Some of them have lots of structured programming. Some of them are more housing and less structured. And it just depends upon the client's need and what they're looking for as to where they want to go. We also have detainers that we can move people to right now. The ICE detainers where people are getting deported is pretty popular. We have a lot of folks moving on to wherever they came from. We also have detainers for whatever crimes they've committed elsewhere. And so if they have warrants out for their arrest somewhere, there's likely a detainer to say, please bring them to us so we can deal with the whatever behavior that happened. And then once they've dealt with that behavior, they will continue down their treatment path. So we end up sometimes the detainer could be to the federal government because maybe they got federal charges. It could be to a county, it could be to another state, just really depends. Parole out of state, we use these for interstate compacts for people, say their family lives in Illinois, their family's in Florida, and they want to parole to those locations. And so we work with other states and make agreements so that they catch our folks and then they're under supervision in that other state. So we reciprocate that for people that want to be in Iowa, or did something in some other state. Okay, you can move forward. All right, so sometimes we have what's called diversions, and diversions are typically by the department, but diversions happen when there's various reasons why they can't go back to where they're from. You may know this, but people end up generally going back to where they did the illegal behavior. It's called where they fell from. So somebody fell from whatever county where they did their behavior. Typically, we put them back toward that community when they leave when we parole them out. But sometimes people had no family, no connections to that community. It was more of a random act. They were on their way through the state or something. So there's really no reason they need to be in that community, and they may have supports elsewhere. So the plan that works best for diversions are people when they have employment lined up, or they have a place to live and they have transportation and family support. It's not great if we move somebody to a brand new place for a new start, but they know nothing, have no supports, nothing. That doesn't always work very well. It becomes very hard very quickly if you don't have a driver's license, if you've lost it due to the crimes you've committed, or due to the fines and fees you'd have to pay to get your license back, and you don't have any of those supports. Diversion to a new place for a new start can be very challenging. Now, we do have to think about some diversions sometimes related to victims or the safety of the offender themselves. Our incarcerated individuals sometimes tick off a community, especially small communities, so much that the community will make threats against them as a person. And we never want to send somebody back to where somebody could get harmed. So we don't want to send somebody to a community where they're going to be out to get that person, because then you'll have more people in trouble doing more bad things. And so then we'd have more problems. So we are sensitive to that. It doesn't happen very often, but think of some of the high profile ones, some of the juvenile lifer cases. We've had some serious threats against persons. And so then we talk with corrections and say, hey, we know it would be best to do this, but what if we did something different to make sure the person stayed safe? So it can happen. So if you're out there again listening and you are a victim advocate, and you're like, I don't want this person in our community for these reasons, there may be options for you. We just have to work that out with the district and talk to them about what's best for the victim as well as for the offender. And so gotta talk about both sides. You can go ahead and move forward. All right, well, I'm almost done. I'm breezing through this because you guys don't have any questions. I don't understand, but you don't have questions. That's all right. So we have projects that we're working on, and I could talk about these forever if you really want to. But Recidiviz is one of our projects, and right now we're working on early release and safe release. They are a project that works with Google and Google data, and they're using Iowa's data to look at places where maybe the board is over incarcerating people, or maybe we're leaving them on supervision too long. And are there ways that we could get people off parole sooner? Are there ways that people maybe need to be out of supervision sooner? And what could that look like? So we're using data to make some data-driven decisions, which is really exciting. If you know much about the history of the board, you could be under the impression that it's subjective, based on personalities, based on different things. What we're trying to do is really work on the history of the data that we have in Iowa to make some informed decisions. And so Recidiviz is one of the ways we're working on that. Another project we're working on is looking at nursing homes for sex offenders. Been around Iowa very long, you know that there's gaps in our system for sex offenders related to sobriety homes and nursing homes. And so in both cases, we continue to work together with corrections to see if we could find people that would be willing to take them. And we have a particular nursing home group that's interested in opening a very specific nursing home specifically for sex offenders. And that way, the challenge typically is that you try to move a sex offender into a regular nursing home and somebody gets worried about somebody getting hurt. But if you've got the idea of licensing it specifically for these offenders with these challenges, with the restrictions all together, I think that's going to work a little better. And so we're working with a couple of different institutions for that. Third project we're working on right now is the same thing, but a skilled nursing home for physically and mentally incapacitated, or hospice. There's a group out of Georgia named Bostic who's interested in coming up and creating like a forensic hospital for us. They use old, previously used corrections buildings or institution buildings and build it. This would be a much larger size nursing home for lots of folks that have different types of challenges. We're working on trying to find additional options for folks. So the big important thing to know for both the nursing home piece and for this facility is if we move people out of corrections, they can draw down federal dollars. And federal dollars could be things like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, or other types of funding to help fund the bill. Right now, the people that we have that are in hospice or in long-term care health-wise, 100% funded by state dollars. And there's a whole lot of work. One of the stories I like to tell is just about dialysis. They have to bring people from dialysis. We have the folks over at the IMCC in Coralville. They have to take them to the University of Iowa hospitals 3 times a week. It requires lots of staffing, lots of coordination, lots of transportation, and that's just one shift. Monday, Wednesday, Friday is a shift. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Saturday is a shift. And so got to think about like what could be saved by partnering better with Medicaid and Medicare. And so we want to figure out like how could we build that? And so to do that, we need facilities that'll take our people that will be willing to have those conversations with us. Another thing, if you were following the legislature this year, a bill was filed, what we're calling medical release legislation. We are the one state in the union who has nothing for compassionate release on the books. And I don't like that. That's not cool. So this is not going to be called compassionate release, but it gets you to the same place. Basically, what this will do is be give an opportunity. Remember those people with mandatory minimums and life sentences right now that I can't parole or do anything with? It would give them an opportunity if they're medically frail, if they're physically or mentally frail, or on hospice, to potentially be able to move them forward to like a nursing home setting or another different type of hospice care. And so again, giving them an option to move out of corrections and to finish up their lives elsewhere. And so it's a pretty narrow window to start, but the idea is really about those folks that would be considered incapacitated. So you really do have people currently right now incarcerated who don't know that they're incarcerated because their memory is gone. They have severe dementias and things of that nature. That doesn't make any sense to me. We're past any kind of rehabilitation. We're past any kind of punishment. If you don't know you're in prison, what are we doing? And so this would give the opportunity for, I think the way they wrote the bill was that family or doctors could write, it would be, the petition would go to the medical director in corrections, and then the medical direction in corrections then would go through the rest of that process where they could then send it to the counselor to say, please run this forward, and then the board would do the regular parole process. So we're really excited about that. Like I said, it has been filed. It didn't go very far this session, but we hope that it comes back around. The governor is interested in that conversation as well as those nursing home conversations. So it goes all the way to the top. So hopefully we'll see some movement here in the next year. The last project we're working on right now is institution staff from the various institutions are being invited in to talk about how the board works. We're trying to learn better about how that works, they want to understand what we see and the decisions we make, those kinds of things. And so we have them invited in and just open our doors to say, you know, hey, let's talk about how we do the job, because it shouldn't be quite the mystery that it has been in the past. You can go ahead and move that forward. So today is an example of this. We do a lot of stakeholder meetings. We're working really hard to help educate folks out there, especially about time calculation, but just more about the board, about what we're trying to do. So we go to every institution every year. We go to every district every year. Our judges go to the districts also. So those are separate visits, but our judges were just out this week up to Ames, and they'll be in Cedar Rapids next week. And we go as kind of part of it is just consumer relations and working with them to see if there's issues on ways we do things or ways we should do things differently or better. We work closely with the police and sheriff's deputies. We were at a group in Des Moines. It's called Plexa. It's the Polk County leaders in the executives of the different police departments and sheriff's departments, and being able to speak there. We are going to be at the Public Defenders Conference coming up in June. And our 10C partners, again, those are those community partners where we go out and visit people. And so we were out like seeing places like Honest Journey and Tim's Club. We went to the Central Iowa Shelter recently. I'm just learning about how to be better partners with them. And then the goal is to add more mental health partners. That's my background. Those are the people that I know and have worked with for decades, but we don't do a great job of connecting everybody in that space. So we're going to have more conversations there. And then we're out working with the victim advocates, making sure that victims know what their rights are, that they get registered, that they're part of the process if they choose to be. All right. And these are the things we work on with corrections. There's a lot of things going on, as you can see. We're not bored over here. But we're working on, making things more efficient and cohesive across institutions and districts. So what do those release recommendations look like? We'll talk about checklists. We're talking about like, what should somebody need, or what kind of issues do they have, or how do they best fit to go to residential or go to one of the programs, so that we just use the resources we have the best we can. It doesn't make any sense if we're sending people to a facility where they don't intend to stay. So for example, some of the facilities, I won't name any names, but some of them, you don't make any money for the first so many months you're present, because they take all the money for housing and things. And so then if you don't make any money and you can't talk to your family for X period of time, it becomes very hard for somebody to want to stay. And so are we just stepping them out the door for them to escape and abscond, and then we've caused them a revocation to come back in? So we're talking about those kinds of things. We always have changes in our icon, is that system I told you about with all the data. We always are dealing with that. So there's a lot of education on things that are new. And then PSI is the pre-sentence investigations. We're working on trying to see if we can make those more congruent. Some of those are awesome, some of those are not, and working in partnership. I don't remember, Katrina could tell us who was spearheading that one, but that was a new project we just started. And I think we're done. Yeah. So this is my assistant. So if you need anything, or you want any of this information to come to a group near you, or you think people should know more about this, please email Tammy and tell her what you'd like, and we would be more than happy to get out to you to get you information about the board and answer any questions that you might have. So that's all I have prepared today, which is kind of short, but does anybody have any questions or anything I can do for you? Wow, we are so awesome. Nobody has questions. Thank you. What do you think, Katrina? Think that's true? We're so awesome. Nobody has questions.
I have a
Probably.
question.
You do? All right, Sarah.
I heard recently that the victims no longer attend in person, they attend virtually.
That's correct.
Okay. How do victims feel about that?
Well, the issue is we don't have security for victims to be in person. So it
Okay.
isn't an issue that's like the best ever. It's a out of necessity to keep people safe.
Yeah.
So we don't have, they used to have troopers and different things that could staff that to allow people in person, but we just don't have that. So what we're working toward actually is a process where victims would be able to meet with us like the month prior to an interview and just have kind of one-on-one conversations with board members, so that they can have any questions answered or whatever, and then stay virtual in the interview itself. We get a couple people that want to be in person, but most people, they like it just the same. I mean, they still have the opportunity to be on camera, to be face to face and say what they need to say. A lot of people don't want to either speak on camera in front of the offender, or they don't want, either they want Heather or victim advocate to read the statement. And so you'd be surprised, most folks don't necessarily want to be in person.
Okay.
So question from ICIW, is there specific criteria we should look at for staff initiations? I would say work with your treatment director. We meet with them weekly. But you know, how is a person managing themselves? How, you know, have they completed programming? Things like that. But yeah, ICIW, definitely reach out to Courtney. And then Charles had a question, Renee, why is community service not more of an option for fees, fines, restitution? I think that would be.
That's not a question I even know. So maybe Charles could explain further. Is he saying that if you do community service, you get, most of the time community service is voluntary, so it wouldn't make any money toward your fees or fines. Are you asking why it's voluntary?
No, what I was kind of wondering is, some of these guys have such huge amounts of fines, fees, restitution to pay back, the dollar amounts they'll never maybe get off probation.
Mm-hmm.
Have we thought about looking at a way that some of that could be traded in for community service hours? Not them getting paid, but just, hey, you got 5,000 hours of community service versus $5,000 that they're never going to pay or be able to pay. And it could get guys off maybe probation sooner. I've always wondered why that hasn't been more of an option or something we've thought about.
And I think they've had discussions, Charles, but again, it's, you know, especially restitution for victims of crime, you know, and county funding, those types of things. Katie Schulte, is the treatment director at Fort Dodge Correctional Facility, and she was a supervisor in Second District. Katie, do you want to elaborate on that, or just that it is approved in some locations?
Yeah, and
Hi,
I've
Charles.
noticed, yeah, and I've noticed it's approved in some locations, but hey, Katie, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
But again, we'll get some guys that have, I mean, they got cases in 5 different counties. And so it's like, yeah, this county will allow it, or these 2 will, but the other ones won't. And I just thought maybe statewide why there wasn't maybe I don't know, a clearer way or a cleaner way to try to do some of this, because those counties that do allow it, and I know I've worked with guys at APHIS to try to get some of that taken care of. It's just when they run up against counties that don't allow it, it just seems, I don't know. I've just always thought to ask that question. So I thought I would
Yeah.
throw it out there.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, so what Charity says is true. So all of those questions are to judges prior to the parole board. We have nothing to do with restitution. We have nothing to do with community service being equated to restitution. That's all based on what the courts allow. And so when if the court would sentence community service in lieu of restitution, that's the judges in the courts. And so that's the level at which you'd have to have those conversations. Appreciate the question.
For sure.
Any other questions about the board? Anything else I can do for y'all?
Hi, Renee.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Hey, and
Good.
speaking of what Charles was talking about, I know in regards to that, it was never applied towards restitution, but it was always applied towards like the fines and stuff. And then a judge would have to sign off that the probation officer or the case manager would put a plan together and submit it to the court and request for that. But usually it was towards the fines and stuff like that, not towards restitution. So
Yep. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. And it really, I mean, it really is a case by case kind of situation. So it's a great question. And I think you can really make some difference with that. It does have to do with what Charity said earlier about, restitution has been late because it's owed to the victim, right? But in some cases, I can speak for a couple of different victims. They'd really rather to get rid of that. Do you know you cannot get rid of that if you're a victim of restitution?
Yeah.
And I have a friend whose wife was killed, who still gets the $1.75 or whatever a month, however many years later. I would really just love not to get that, because it's a terrible reminder of a crime that was committed 20 years ago. He'd give that $1.75 to anybody else ever, right? But there's something's messed up with that. So victims, if they could get rid of restitution, might, and then you might be able to trade, but it's messed up on both sides. It's restitution is determined, and then maybe the victim didn't want it either. And so I had another friend that had their identity stolen, and I swear their checks really were like $1.05. And what am I gonna do with all that, right? It cost about as much to mail you the letter that it did to send them the check. So it's like the whole system in that realm, in my opinion, should probably have just a revamp of what options there are. And to your point, when the numbers are so high and somebody's never going to get there, what are we going to do? Because that leads to that perpetual supervision forever kind of situation, which is not what we're trying to do either. Any other questions or thoughts? Man, I'm taking this that we're awesome and we're not in trouble with y'all. So yay for I always take it that way. If there's no questions, that means we're doing a good job.
There you go. Well, Renee, thank you so much for
Glad to be here.
bringing it.
I was
home.
on earlier today. You had some great stuff today. So thanks for, I heard some really good things. So thanks for being able to participate. It's a little crazy at the board this time of year, but